Hi there, welcome back to ATCB Gaming. It's been a while since we filmed any new content on the channel. There's going to be a bit of a status update coming in the next couple of weeks about that. But in the meantime, I thought I'd show off some new Kickstarter goodies to you guys in the form of the new fantasy sort of open world-ish RPG from Free League. A Swedish RPG company, Fria Liga, it's the Swedish name I believe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Forbidden Lands, yeah, Rogues and Raiders in a Cursed World. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time now. I'm a bit of a fan of Tales from the Loop, which is the Simon Stalenhag sort of 80s retro sci-fi RPG that they did. Was it earlier this year or was it last year? Recently, anyway. We've actually got a bit of a show and tell video for that Kickstarter as well on the channel, if you want to go check that out. But yeah, Forbidden Lands is their latest RPG. It's their take on kind of sort of classic 80s fantasy role-playing. Even down to things like the book binding and the fact that it comes in a box with multiple books and stuff like that, which is gorgeous. Obviously, the first thing to note with all these things is they look amazing. They're really swiftly becoming one of their hallmarks is swiftly becoming the visual flair with which their design is carried out, and this is absolutely no exception. I believe this cover art is by Simon Stalenhag as well. I wasn't aware he did fantasy style art. Maybe he does it frequently, or maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But either way, I love this. A lot of their RPGs, including Mutant Year Zero, which is a post-apocalyptic thing, and Coriolis, which is a kind of sci-fi. It's basically Firefly meets Arabian Nights, which I also got as part of the Kickstarter add-ons for this, but I won't go through them in this video. They all use a very similar D6 system, which is essentially you roll a bunch of D6, and if successes equal sixes. So if you roll any sixes, you have succeeded, and if you don't, you don't. It's quite straightforward and simple. There is more nuance to it than that, and each of the individual games has a different, adds a different flair to that rule set. In different ways, some of them in more similar ways, some of them in more distinct ways. So that's, yeah, generally really simple to learn, really cool. Each of them, or most of them, also have some element of, I guess, base building is what you'd call it. In Forbidden Lands, it's a stronghold that you build in the Forbidden Lands. In Coriolis, there's a spaceship, and in Mutant Year Zero, there's an ark where your people survive. So there's this kind of thread running through all their systems, but they do manage to each be very distinct, certainly visually, and also add lots of little bits and pieces to them that make them just not kind of a generic system with a theme slammed each on top of each of them. So that's great. But yeah, the Forbidden Worlds Kickstarter has just been delivering. I think there were some minor bumps on the road with their delivery company, but it's here now. And yeah, we're going to go through some of the things that came with that, all the things related to Forbidden Lands, which I think is everything that is currently available for Forbidden Lands. Some of it will have been Kickstarter only, so apologies if you see this on the video and go, oh, that's amazing, I want to get it, and now you can't, but yeah, that's just how it is. But I think most of it should be available in your friendly local game store or online via Free League themselves or, wherever. But yeah, we're going to take a look at some of this stuff. So the first thing to note is obviously the main game comes in a box, which I do love. Again, very retro, very kind of, I think it was 2nd edition or possibly 2.5 of D&D. Don't punish me, I don't play a lot of D&D. That came in the red box thing, yeah, and a lot of other 80s RPGs came in stuff like this. But yeah, it's nice, and it's just different from just buying a book, which I do like. And then, probably the first thing you notice about this is that the cover on, or the covering, the binding, not the binding, I don't know, of these primary books is absolutely gorgeous. I'm not sure if they're actually leather bound. I would guess probably not. But hey, maybe they are, surprise me. But don't they look amazing? These look absolutely amazing. I am not entirely sure, you can tell I've done lots of research for this, right? I'm not entirely sure whether this covering on these is like a Kickstarter exclusive, and whether the game you buy in the shops might have a more simplistic cover and binding and whatnot. Yeah, so that might be worth researching if this is the thing that really sells you. Although hopefully it's the great looking system and the interesting world. Then yeah, maybe double check that before you pick it up in the shops. But otherwise, yeah, look, it's got a bookmark tag thing. Amazing, amazing. Okay, I'm not going to go thoroughly in depth over every page in this, or kind of give you a full rules breakdown or anything like that, because I've only myself really just skimmed the books, but I wanted to basically put this online as selfishly quickly to get the hits, and also for people who are really interested in the release that's just happened. So we start off with a map here of the Forbidden Lands. The setting, as far as I can remember, is essentially that it takes place in this area, the Forbidden Lands, that has been kind of magically cut off from the rest of this fantasy world for, I think, like hundreds of years, and has developed its own kind of like social system within it. And I believe within that time you couldn't travel far from wherever you lived, because there was this thing called the Blood Mist, that would prevent you from doing so. So it's kind of ruled by this demon sorcerer king and his servants, and yeah, you play adventurers basically coming in from the outside, or possibly travelling in from areas within this, but where you haven't been able to leave before, but now you can travel across the land because this spell has been kind of mysteriously dissipated. So you're striking out and trying to make a living, seems a strong word, a name for yourself, and carve your path in this sort of weirdly fresh but also horribly tainted landscape, is the idea. So the other thing to mention, obviously, about the interior of these books, the paper quality is amazing, by the way. If such a thing is important to you, I know it is to me quite frequently, is that not only is it a kind of retro, the box is retro, the covering is retro, all this kind of thing, but the design on the inside, oh my word, it's really nostalgic. You know what it really reminds me of, and I don't know if this was partially intentional, but kind of advanced fighting fantasy, things like that. Whoa, look at it, it's absolutely gorgeous, and it really refreshes the sense of how things like that, although some of the, a lot of it does look retro and out of place now, like if it's done with modern sensibilities of design, can still look absolutely amazing. I mean, look at this, it's great. The layout again is very very old school, which it has pluses and minuses to it, right? On the one hand, it's amazing to look at, and it's amazing to just read as well. I find it a lot easier to read something like this than I do, like, one of your big standard roleplay books. But on the other hand, leafing through this mid-session may be a bit traumatic. We'll find out. But yeah, these are the races you can play, which are mostly fairly typical fantasy races, but with a couple of minor exceptions. So you got your humans, your elves, your half-elves, dwarves and halflings and all the rest. Each of these have minor effects on the characters you build. They have key attributes, so you can raise them higher than you would others at character creation. They have kin talents. Talents are essentially like little powers that you can do. They have typical professions, but you're not limited to them, and it's got just some female and male name suggestions, stuff like that. Everything has this slightly darker veneer over it, which is something I really like. One of the things that really leapt out at me when I first read this stuff was that basically halflings are kind of very typical hobbity creatures living in a Shire-like setting, but with this vague veneer of these diseased kind of slightly nefarious rejects from their family who live in the woods and protect them, but they don't speak of them because that's not something for polite society to talk about. And that's really cool, especially when a few pages later you realise that those are the goblins. So in this, goblins and halflings are effectively the same race, just slightly split off from each other and related to each other in a really genuinely and healthy way. You also get to potentially play as wolfkin, which is kind of obviously werewolf type characters, and orcs, who are pretty evil. Pretty evil dudes, so there's an interesting sort of dynamic you could build up in your party by doing some things like that, or not. You've then got a whole bunch of professions, and again, you know, fairly generic stuff. Again, they have a key attribute, so you can raise that a bit higher. They have, you know, profession skills and stuff like that. I won't go too in depth into how the character creation works, partially because I don't exactly know precisely how it works. I've skimmed through it. But also because that's not really what this video is. Yeah, druids, fighters, hunters, minstrels, peddlers, riders, rogues, sorcerers. Obviously that's a fairly typical list with a couple of exceptions, which I do enjoy. Peddler being one of them, and rider being the other. Typically on a horse, as you can see here, but I believe other races can use animals more familiar to them. So there's an example. A few pages back, we had a goblin wolf rider, which I believe you can create, which is great. Love a bit of wolf riding action. Yeah, and that was interesting. Oddly enough, when I saw the peddler, it gave me real flashbacks to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where all the characters would have really quite humdrum professions to begin with and then grow into fancier ones. It doesn't do that. I wouldn't, you know, that comparison is just what the peddler thing reminded me of. But it was a pleasant little flash of nostalgia all the same. You've got your attributes, which are fairly, you know, there's a short list of them. It's fairly simple: strength, agility, wits, and empathy. You run through these things with like generating them really quickly. The impression I got from looking through, again, like their other games, character creation, quick, relatively simple. Learning the rules, quick, relatively simple. Love it. Really good stuff. As I get older and older, the concept of RPGs laden down with excess rules really appalls me. A whole new set. Oh god, I've got to learn all this. So if you too are old or young and sick of massively complex rules, then again, this is not a game that's going to put you off. I think age has some relative importance in the system in terms of, yeah, so if you're young or adult or old, you lose out on attributes, but you gain on talents, I think, which are, as I say, tricks and abilities that give you a small advantage in the game. Kind of powers, essentially, what it does. You have some role-playing related creation stuff, like your pride, dark secret, things like that, which can come into play and affect things. Yeah, obviously you set your relationships, your gear. It's got some encumbrance, but really nothing overloaded. It's just kind of a certain amount of heavy, light, tiny items, etc. So it really doesn't affect very much. You do have consumables, i.e. food and drink and things like that. And part of the reason why is because there's a certain sort of pseudo-survival element to the game, to travelling around the game and travelling around the setting, that I do really like, and I'll come into this later because it feeds into this kind of open world feel that the game has, which I find really exciting. Some stuff on, you know, this is all... I'm going to leaf through a lot of this, but obviously a lot of it will just be, well, you know, these are the rules for X, Y, and Z. So we've got skills, we've got pushing a roll, we have, you know, adjustments to be made to the rolls, modifications, difficulties, group rolls, opposed rolls, all the usual things you'd have with the basic roll information here. And again, only a few pages, right? And I've gone through it. When I had a look through the PDFs that were sent out when they were ready, which is, I think maybe some corrections have been made, but more or less completely identical to this, I thought that everything was written very well, and was honestly a big improvement on Tales from the Loop. Tales from the Loop wasn't badly written, and it wasn't complex, but there was just a little bit of sometimes you felt that like the translation from the Swedish was just a little bit off, or a little bit of confusing things where things would be mentioned slightly before the context in which they made sense was mentioned in the furthering text. This, not so much at all. I think they've definitely learned. Not that there were massive mistakes in Tales from the Loop, but I think they've learned from the little bits and pieces, maybe of feedback they've got from Tales from the Loop, or what they've read themselves. And yeah, this to me reads like a much more carefully laid out book. And I didn't have at any point when I was, running through it, did I think, oh, well, I don't understand this. So it's very well structured, which is lucky, I think, because the nature of the layout of this means, as I say, could be a bit of a nightmare to pace back and forth in and try and find things. So yeah, you've got all the skill sections. Each skill is linked to an attribute, so there's kind of this is all very typical stuff. If you played RPGs before, this is not a game that will throw you. Certainly not mechanically. It may in other areas, like the open world nature of it. We'll get onto that in a bit, but not so much here. Talents, like I say, they're more kind of powers that you have, essentially. So there are general talents, and then there are ones that are linked to your kin or to your profession. These also include spells, essentially. It's very similar, like, from my limited understanding of modern D&D, I've been playing a little bit of it, which is coming on the channel. Spells needn't be actual spells, essentially. Spells is just kind of a catch-all term for general powers that your character has. I might be wrong on this, but in that case, it is comparable to talents. If I'm right, that's quite comparable to talents. So there's obviously quite a lot of these. There's different paths you can take within each profession. I believe you can eventually follow them all. Maybe I could be wrong. That's from my understanding. But it means you can, specialize yourself a little bit. So for example here, the fighter's talents, we've got Path of the Blade, Path of the Enemy, and Path of the Shield. And that kind of lets you build your character a bit more towards where you might want to go with them. So Path of the Blade sounds obviously more damage related. Path of the Enemy makes you more, maybe, sneaky and using of combinations and stuff like that. And Path of the Shield, more tanky. So, great. You've got those little specializations that you can build into your character. Love stuff like that. Much better than overloading with excess classes, I'm all for the subclass experience, people. And then you've got stuff like your general talents, ambidextrous, Boyer, Brawler, Lucky, stuff like that. There's one that I thought was very interesting in that there's a certain element, sort of moral element to the game, I guess, sort of in my head, because I'm an old school World of Darkness fanboy. I like to compare it to like humanity in Vampire the Masquerade and things like that. There was certainly something, here we go, cold-blooded. You are completely callous and can kill defenseless enemies without so much as a second's hesitation, because if you do basically murder people, it starts to it starts to have an effect on your character, and I do think that's interesting. There is a certain element within this of kind of corruption and becoming tainted by the land and the dark magic around you, and I like that kind of stuff. I do like that kind of stuff. Your mileage may vary. But yeah, general talents that we've got here. Quite a lot to choose from, so you can do a nice little bit of character building at the beginning, and then there's room for you to expand as well. We've got a section on combat and damage. The combat, there's a couple of options of how you can have the combat. You can have a slightly more simplistic fashion combat, which is just fairly closely linked to the actual, the basic rule set of the game. It's pretty much as you'd expect. It seems to me to be fairly brutal. It's quite hard to kill your characters in this, from what I can detect. But it's quite easy to be downed. So yeah, I won't go into too much detail on it, because I don't know that detail too well. You can make combat, here we go, advanced close combat. You can make it a bit more complicated via use of cards, which I'm sure you could make yourself. I have the card deck as a Kickstarter add-on that comes with this. I'll show you it in a bit. But essentially, they're playing cards, which are very well designed, I have to say, that let you choose hidden combinations and it's a kind of, parry and strike and maneuver and hinder sort of thing that allows for a bit of back and forth between either the player and the GM, or between players potentially. And I do like that kind of thing, a bit of kind of sneaky capacity to bluff and outthink your opponent to a certain degree. I like that kind of stuff. Again, I won't go into it in too much detail because I don't know too much detail off the top of my head. But yeah, some bits on social conflict and ranged combat weapons. There's lots of different weapons in the game, which I like, being a weapon nerd. They instantly gain my favour by picturing a flail as a flail and a morning star as a morning star. Thank you, people. There's so many people watching this thinking I'm an asshole for caring about that right now. That's fine, you can think I'm an asshole. I probably am. So, we've got stuff about armour, stuff about equipment being broken. Essentially, gear can be individual dice that you roll with your general pool. And if it's good enough equipment, then it can add specific dice to it. But if you roll, I think, ones on those dice, they can be partially broken, and then, unless you get to repair them, they can go down the chain and become completely broken. I like little stuff like that. I like dice determining things more than the direct result of what you're rolling for. So that's good. We've got some illustrations of different kind of weapons from different races. So we've got orc weapons here and dwarf weapons there. They all have the same stats as far as I'm aware. It's just they wanted to picture different things, and that's cool. Information on different conditions, so hunger, thirst, sleep, cold, fear, falling, drowning, all these conflict rules that you would expect in this kind of RPG are here. Great. Some information on riding, which is obviously quite important for the rider class or profession. Okay, we have got magic listed separately from talents, so evidently I'm talking absolute rubbish. I remember now, yes. So the talents, as far as I'm aware, determine which spells you can pick. Yes? No? Maybe? Who knows? That's it as far as I can remember now that I actually think about it and don't just ramble onwards. There's different magical schools here. And they're pretty much what you'd expect, healing, shape-shifting, awareness, symbolism, stuff like that, stone song. I only flicked through these, but they seem quite cool and seemed impactful without being overpowered, which is quite an important thing for Magic to be. Yeah, great stuff. Now we move on to more of the sort of open world sense of it. I should have said at the beginning, by the way, this is the player's handbook. So everything in here is cool for players to see. Essentially, this is rules for travelling around the landscape of the Forbidden Lands, which seem pretty good to me. They seem not too dissimilar from the rules in the One Ring, if you played that, the relatively new, although that's showing my age probably, Middle-earth Lord of the Rings role-playing game from Cubicle 7. But they are much simpler. They are definitely much simpler. But yeah, a similar kind of like travelling around while trying to cope with the arduousness of travelling around this landscape. Different rules, fishing and resting, making camp, sea travel, blah, blah, blah. We've then got a little bit about the stronghold, which is your base of operations that you can build within the Forbidden Lands, kind of wherever you like. Stuff about upkeep, guarding it, hiring people, expanding on it with fields and forges and libraries and pastures and shrines and root cellars and so much stuff. Hiring craftsmen and soldiers and etc., etc. I love this kind of stuff. I love it in video games, I love it in tabletop games, and I love my players having it in tabletop games. It's really fun stuff to do. It's a common thread, like I said earlier, that runs through Free League's games. Love it. Love this stuff. Great. You've got sections on gear, which is now mostly just, big lists of stuff. Trade goods, weapons, etc., etc. Things like, the raw materials you need to make it, the price, how common they are, how heavy they are, blah, blah. The usual stuff you'd expect to find at the back end of a player guide like this. You've got sections on critical injuries, so what happens if you get hit particularly hard. charts to roll on that with horrible stuff that could happen to you. You've got this frankly gorgeous and again very retro character sheet and the stronghold sheet. Slight criticism I would have for those of you who prefer to photocopy this. I don't even want to, put this in a photocopier because the binding obviously leads very close to the side there. You'll probably end up cutting off a lot of it unless you really crack open that spine. And oh my god, who would do that to such a gorgeous book? I have no doubt, however, that there will be PDFs that you can just download and print off. So it's a moot point, really. That's generally a better way to do it anyway. And you've got yourself an index. And that's pretty much the player's handbook. So there we go. Now, we'll take a look at the Games Master's Guide. I'll skip through it a little bit more, partly because I don't want to repeat myself, but also partly because I don't want anyone to accidentally see anything if they're going to be a player that might spoil anything for them. So, again, similar, exactly the same covering and binding, gorgeous, etc., etc., etc. Noticeably bigger than the player's handbook, which is probably the other way around from how it usually is. So, obviously there's your bit at the beginning about general sort of, is there anything about what is role-playing? I guess there isn't so much, but it's that kind of thing, talking about what sessions are, talking about the basics of GMing, and it goes straight into some crazy event tables of events that can happen at players' strongholds. It goes into the actual history of the world in really quite a lot of detail. Again, I skimmed through this. It seemed interesting, and while the feel of a lot of this on the surface is quite, generic humans, elves, dwarves, magic and swords and sorcery and things like that, the actual individual detail is quite unique, with some nice ideas running through it. So if anyone's put off by generic fantasy, which I am, for the most part, this doesn't put me off. After reading through this, I was like, oh, okay, those are some cool ideas. And there's some interesting, particularly like some nice horror threads running through this. It's dark, but not in a grim and gritty and, I don't know, like Game of Thrones kind of way. It's dark as in there's evil stuff and there's horror stuff and there's twisted nastiness out there and things like that. You could certainly play this lighthearted, but the general veneer running through it is more kind of like I say, a survival horror element that's just bubbling underneath the surface, which I really like. You've got some information, you've got some world building stuff like calendars, gods. Love this bit of design of this god, I guess the statue of the god, I don't know, Rust here, which I have to say really quite strongly reminds me of the design from the Banner Saga. No bad thing. Oh my word, I can't remember what they're called in the Banner Saga. That is going to absolutely... The Dredge. There we go. In the Banner Saga. There we go. Yeah, and then some information on the different races. A nice little map of the Forbidden Lands with where all the different tribes and races are laid out, which is nice. There's a race in here called Saurians, by the way, who aren't in the character creation, who are like lizard people. That smacks to me of something that might get a supplement later on, like, oh, here's how you play Saurians, and there's ogres as well. Yeah, who knows? We'll see. You've got some typical stats for the different races in the different areas, just for NPCs, I guess, which is great. But as you can see, there's lots of information about this kind of stuff, which is great. It's got depth there for you to get your teeth into. Yeah, there we go. Saurians. And a couple of different races. Whiners, who aren't part of the playable races. You've got a bit of a bestiary, which is great. Is decent. It's a decent size and a decent number of monster things. And they're very unique and lots of them look very challenging. One of the things I'd be most interested in for Forbidden Lands would definitely be a kind of monsters compendium or what have you, because while these are great, it's the kind of campaign that you could see running for quite a long time. and you don't want to get too repetitious with the foes that your party faces. So that might be quite a nice thing. That would be one of my requests. Free League, if you're watching, you know, that could be cool. That could be cool. And maybe I'd love for them to... A lot of this, obviously, I know the vibe of this is classic fantasy. And I know, considering that... Excuse me, my cat is having some crazy sneezing fit in the background. I know that part of the thing of that is you want things like your minotaurs and your manticores and dragons and all things like that. That's what you want. But I'd love for them to go a little bit crazier if they did a Monsters Compendium, because it's the kind of setting where you can have these weird creatures, because no one knows their way around these forbidden lands, and you have all these little corners of weirdness where these crazy, odd creatures exist. I'd love to see more of that. You've got an artifacts list. I mean, that's essentially, you know, magic items that have various effects. Cool stuff. Cool loot that your players can get. And then you get what really is the real meat of this Games Master section, which is encounters, amongst other things. But yeah, massive sort of double D6 encounter chart with lots of detail, some flavour, some extra kind of bits on where you'd kind of find this event and what could happen to the party when they encounter it. Great stuff, great stuff. And then you get, was that a D6, double D6? Because it ends at 43 rather than 66. I don't know. Anyway, there's quite a few of them. You then get adventure sites, which are sort of the Forbidden Land equivalent of scenarios. I will skip through these quite quickly, because again, I don't want to potentially spoiler any people out there. You get sections, lots of tables and stuff for randomly creating them, which is fantastic. In fact, a whole load of, as you can see, a whole load of stuff for randomly generating adventure sites, which is fantastic. And then you get a bunch of adventure sites, which are pre-created. So the Hollows, which is a village. And again, I'm going to skip through these, but okay, check this out. How lovely is this location art? All annotated for the rest of the section to show you where individual things are. And just a great, you know, you can turn to your players and say, okay, so you come across the crest of a hill into the valley below, and into the valley is the Hollows, a village, right? And you could just show them this. Oh my god. And they instantly get a real grounding and a sense of the geography of the village they're about to enter. That is great, and something not enough games do visually. If you're providing a setting, show me the setting as it could be seen by an actual person. I know it's a certain kind of bird's eye view, but yeah, great. Fantastic. And all these annotations link back to that. They're not structured like a traditional, here's a story that you run here. It's more, here's an area, here's everything that's going on there, here's all the potential story seeds you could have. Go crazy with it. It's more of that. So I would say, okay, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Forbidden Lands to a starting GM. We'll go into that in more detail towards the end of the video, where I kind of sum up in different ways who this is for and who it isn't. But I just put that down there now. You've got Weatherstone, again, another adventure site. I think most of the rest of the book is these adventure sites, which read pretty good to me from what I've skimmed over them. There's not too many in the basic GM book. I think that's 3 of them, yeah. You've got these, which are the legends about the artifacts that are they're here as handouts, not that you'd use. Well, you could photocopy them. You could certainly photocopy them easier than you could the sheets, but I just print out a PDF, to be honest. That's it for the Games Master's Guide. Let's have a look at a couple of the extra bits and bobs in the core set. Again, not 100% that these are part of what you buy in the shop. I think they are. But you know, check first if it's like a deal maker for you. You've got this little booklet, Legends and Adventurers. It just gives you a way to randomly generate backstories, which is great, nice, fantastic, and a bit of random generation of events. So, and legends and stuff. So it's just some extra things to help you as the GM insert more into your landscape that you've created yourself. You then get, if I can tip this up because it's proving difficult to get out, obviously, as a shoe-in for this, really necessary, is a map of the Forbidden Lands, hex-based, with everything laid out. It's double-sided, and I'll show you partially why in a second. But yeah, great detail. You can easily see what terrain everything is, which is obviously important since various adventure sites only occur in certain areas, and obviously it's good to know where your adventurers are hanging out as well. And obviously, if your adventurers build their stronghold on one of these hexes, it's nice to be able to kind of see the general geography around it. There's a bit of a droning noise in the background now. If it gets any worse, I'll put a cut in the video, but I suspect it's the street being cleaned. Now, why are there two sides to this? Well, at least part of the reason is because you get some stickers. I really don't know why I said it in that way. Some stickers, that's better. And they include kind of the adventure sites in the game, as well as from a couple of the supplements. And I think these are more just some generic things. There's gravestones, maybe that's where your players died, and generic villages that you may have created yourself, so you can populate the map a bit more with them. And then obviously if you wanted a fresh start, there's another side, or if you just wanted a version without stickers, there's another side. So great, thinking ahead. Thank you, Freely. We'll take a look now at some of the kind of supplementary stuff I got through the Kickstarter. We won't go into it in quite as much detail as we did with that stuff, or we'll spend a little less time on it, because I really want to get to some of my thoughts about how this is going to run and who I'd kind of recommend this to. But we will take a look at the other material right now. Okay, let's start by taking a look at the card deck, being as I mentioned it before already. So you've got these, which are for the kind of more complicated, slightly card-based combat system that I mentioned when we were running through the player's guide. Yeah, they're fully detailed. They've got kind of details of how you'd use them printed on them. So generally, great stuff. There's two sets of them because you just need two, one for each side in the conflict. Yeah. Fairly straightforward and simple stuff, to be honest. You've also got some sort of... I think these are like random characters, or are they... I'm not sure what these are, Random characters? Mounts? I think they're mounts. But anyway, you've also got some of the legends of the artifacts here as handouts. Yeah, fairly straightforward, really. Nice little supplementary pack. If you're going to use the advanced combat, I definitely probably recommend picking it up for these cards. And these make decent handouts. It saves you having to print them off, right? Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I got them free as part of the Kickstarter. I don't know what their cost is outside of that. So, your mileage may vary on that, as with all things, but there we go. We'll take a look at the dice set, which I got with this, which, based on the fact that it comes boxed, I'm assuming is available outside outside of the Kickstarter. Now, I am a sucker for custom dice, as regular viewers of the channel will be aware, or at least if they've watched the roleplay and tabletop content. Yeah, oh, look at these. Oh, I love them. I really love them. They are really good looking. Now, you may be confused by this, seeing as I had said earlier in this video that this is a D6 system. It is for the most part, but under certain circumstances, with certain boosts, you can get D8s, D10s and D12s to roll as part of your dice pool. They work in a very similar way in that on the normal dice, as you can see here from the fact that everything else is numbered, one is got a skull because ones can be bad under certain circumstances. But the 6 has a cross swords. That means it's an actual success because 6s equal successes. In the higher dice, so let's look at the D8 for example. So a 6 is a success, as you can see again there, crossed symbols. You can see that. and a 7 is a success, again, cross swords, but an 8 is 2 successes, and under many circumstances the number of successes can be important, and it essentially carries on from there. So you've got this D10, I love this colour scheme by the way, this like very sky blue and yellow, love that. If we can find the 10, yes, 10s have 3 successes on them, etc. And I imagine if you find this 12, yes, 12 on the D12 has 4. So that's I think that's a really elegant and interesting way to expand on your relatively simple D6 system. So well done, Free League, on that. I really love that. I also really love these the design of these dice. So whoever did that, I hope they got the day off after they did it, because yeah, these dice, gorgeous design, lovely. What else have we got? We have got Raven's Purge. Now, slightly different binding and cover style, but nonetheless amazing. It's got a very, again, I know I keep saying retro and 80s, and those of you who weren't around in the 80s may not know that a lot of books in the 80s had these kind of covers. I don't know if it's cardboard or something, very stiff material. Yeah. Oh, great. Just the touch. I don't even want to get into how lovely I find the design of these books. So nice. Again, you'll have a problem maybe photocopying certain things or flicking through them just because of the design. It's exactly the same kind of design, but yeah, it's great. Leads off with a short story, and then goes into kind of more of an idea of how to link your campaign into one consistent story. Not in terms of giving you literally a story to run through it, but certainly linking everything a bit more in the background, in the world building, between the different adventure sites, all the different kind of meta characters in it, and giving you the material. Not so much giving you a campaign as giving you the material you would need to turn your slightly random open world wandering RPG into a campaign. But not, like I say, not so much a structured, defined, here is the story from A to B campaign, but one which kind of peels back the setting and peels back the underlying story and history behind the Forbidden Lands in a way in which you could build to be narratively satisfying for your player characters as they explore it, as they kind of go through it. I think some of these adventure sites are a bit linked in that you do one before you could gain access to the other, but then they're certainly not linked in a direct narrative sense for the most part. That is as far as my understanding of it. I've only skimmed Raven's Purge very, very lightly, but as far as I'm aware, that's the kind of sense of it. It's like you can play with Forbidden Lands on its own, but it will require, some work on the GM's part if they want to build it into a cohesive narrative with a story running through it that is less sort of random and players pottering about. Essentially what you've got here, and I have been comparing it to Skyrim, to friends when I've been talking about it, not necessarily because I love Skyrim to bits, I like Skyrim well enough, but because it's a very noticeable, very popular comparison point. Essentially, Forbidden Lands is Skyrim without the main quest running through it. This gives you some elements of the main quest, but allows you to put the links between it yourself. Does that make sense? Maybe that makes sense. I don't know. But even so, I wouldn't say it's, I'm saying it's the main quest, maybe giving it more cohesiveness than it is due. Although I wouldn't say that cohesiveness is necessarily a strong point. Yeah, this is the supplement you get if you really want to link it into a cohesive campaign, I think is probably the idea. But even with that, it is by no means, this is a story. The adventure sites are detailed in exactly the same way they are in this. So you're going to have to do the work on structuring things, you're going to have to do some improvisation, and you're going to have to decide how much you and your players want this to become one kind of overarching story. Do you want a meta plot? Great, this will help you with that a lot. Do you not want a meta plot? No? Great. You can still use this because it's full of adventure sites and craziness and context for the world and background and characters you can use and etc, 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 etc. What they're essentially doing is giving you the tools to play this game however you like. However, there are some limitations on that. Again, I'll come back to this at the end with more of my thoughts about that. You'd probably be able to sense where I'm going with it, but yeah. We've got another, and this is almost certainly a Kickstarter bonus. I don't know if this is available in the shops, but maybe it is. I don't know. It's basically just 4 new adventure sites. I don't think they're linked. I could be completely wrong. Yeah, they are written by some of the best writers in the field today. I am terrible at staying linked to the role-playing industry and kind of knowing what's going on and who people are, but just as some name-dropping, Patrick Stewart, not that one, author of Veins of the Earth. I don't know what that is. Probably good. Chris McDowell, creator of Into the Odd. Ben Milton, creator of Maze Rats. And Carl Stjernberg, hopefully I've got that name pronounced right, creator of Rad Hack. Basically, have written little adventure sites. As I say, I don't think they're linked. They're just more adventure sites for you to use. More. And scatter across this world. Great. Fantastic. Like I say, I don't know if this is available in the shops. Obviously, a hell of a lot of work has gone into designing this. I hope it is. That'd be great, wouldn't it, if people can buy this? Yeah, sure. The only other thing I wanted to mention, like I say, I did get a couple of other RPGs as add-ons with this, just because they were available cheaper. But this is the only other Forbidden Lands related thing, is a good old GM screen. I never used to use GM screens, and I've been doing RP for, a long time now, folks. But I always found them cumbersome, didn't really see the advantage in them. And a lot of the time, to be honest, I'm not sat at a table when I'm doing roleplay with people. We're sat around in more comfy chairs, rolling dice on any available flat surface nearby us. I've warmed up to them a bit now, because it is nice having the information in front of you. I'm getting older and stupider and with a worse memory, so it is nice to have these things in front of us. As far as its actual function as a GM screen goes, this looks great. It's got some relevant tables on the back of it. The quality of the, cardboard, whatever, is absolutely superb. This is thick. You could stun a small dog with this GM screen. It is really good quality stuff. Solid, thoroughly recommended. My only quibble with this is that, and this is something utterly irrelevant to anyone purchasing it outside of the Kickstarter, is that when it was kind of posted on the Kickstarter as a potential add-on you could add, the preview art for it was this gorgeous Simon Stalenhag cover art, which I'm absolutely in love with. And this, which is the cover of Raven's Purge, was what it actually came with. And, right, okay, I am in no way saying that I am owed this artwork or that they fooled me into believing it would be this artwork, because it was preview stuff. And I'm not saying this is bad art either. I have, for example, my housemate prefers this art to the Stalenhag piece. This is great. I'm not criticising whoever did this art, or if you prefer this art or whatever like that, but I much preferred that to this. I'm just not fond of this. It's not my kind of thing. So I was a bit disappointed when I got it out and realised that it had this instead of that, which was on the preview. But that's fine. That's just my little point. It's irrelevant to you guys now anyway, because if you're going to pick this up from the shops, you will know that it is this because, well, it's this and you're buying it. You can see it. So that's great. And the actual quality of it, can't fault it. Can't fault it. I don't know how handy these tables are on first look to ones I would use moment to moment in the game. I simply haven't run it yet. I don't know. So, I can't give you a kind of mini review on that element of it. So, Forbidden Lands, my overall impression. Here we go. This is a really interesting game. while you can run essentially any role-playing game, or most role-playing games, as a kind of open-world, rambling explorathon, very few of them are specifically tailored to it. This is Mutant Year Zero, another one of Free League games, which I mentioned earlier in this video, is also quite like that. If what you want out of a role-playing game, or something that you haven't experienced within role-playing that you'd like to, is a more open-world setting akin to, again, using a video game example, something like Skyrim, where your players can wander around to their heart's content, go where they want to go, have a bit more of an open-ended experience, albeit with a lot of material to help you along the way, the adventure sites, the Raven's Purge sort of meta plot. This seems to serve exactly your needs. If you are also into generic-ish fantasy, but with some nice ideas, if you are into simplistic systems that nevertheless have some elegance and nuance to them, this also seems to be your thing. Some caveats to that. Number one, I have no idea how much this is retailing for in the shops. Again, you know, I could have probably done that research, but I didn't, so here we are. So I can't judge it based on cost. If you live in America, you're probably going to pay a bit of import on this, because I believe the manufacturing base of this obviously will be in Europe if the creators are Swedish. So that might be something to look out for, I don't know. I would categorically not recommend this game to starting GMs, unless you want to start with a hefty challenge. Because here's the thing, I don't think this game will likely, because of the very nature of it, will ever have pre-written stories for it. The adventure sites are kind of that, but they require a bit more effort on the part of the GM, and certainly some improvisational skill based on having, you know, read and tried to memorize as much of those adventure sites as possible. So for a starting GM, this is definitely going to be challenging. I don't think it's impossible to do it, but it's definitely going to be a bit of a challenge to you. Similarly, for new players, hey, if your player is someone who said, I've played something like, you know, Skyrim or I don't know, anything else. I'm trying to find another really open world fantasy RPG in my head. Like, I don't know, MMOs to a certain degree or whatever. I want to say The Witcher, but I know that's a bit more story structured. If they've played something like that and go, I really want a tabletop experience like that, then hey, this could be for them. This really could be for them. But in my experience, most new players, one of the things they struggle with, ironically, given that it's something that experienced players really value, is an excess of agency, right? They don't want to be, by and large, thrown into a fantasy world and go, okay, what do you want to do? They want more structure, they want more direct narrative, and they want something where they can unfurl their role-playing wings in a more comfortable fashion. So, this may not be for new players either, but that strongly depends on said players. So, with those two caveats, maybe slightly more difficult for new GMs, maybe slightly more difficult for new players, notwithstanding the rather elegant and simple rule system. There's now a helicopter going overhead because apparently today is noise day in York. On my initial impressions of this, really strong. Really strong. I like the system on reading. I don't know how much, when it makes contact with the tabletop, that may shift a bit. I don't know. I really like the idea of having an open world, more meta-narrative setting in which my players can determine their own destiny and I can kind of react and improvise to that. I really like that idea. I don't think it'll be for everyone. Some people may find the retroness of it off-putting. I think in many circumstances I could have found that off-putting, but the way in which it's been executed by Free League in terms of the quality of the media and the quality of the writing and the world building has really sold those things for me in a way other settings wouldn't have done. because I myself can be a bit skeptical about that kind of thing. So, Forbidden Lands, overall first impressions, extremely good. The actual quality of the product as delivered to me, amazing. Really, really very good indeed. Absolutely top notch as far as I'm concerned. I've had this for about a week now, and I've been showing it off to everyone who would even have a vague interest in it. It's really impressive stuff. Top quality product, so well done, Free League. Yeah, great, right? If you've got any questions about it that you think I can answer, then feel free to post them in the comments below. As always, likes and subscriptions are highly valued. We've got a Patreon that will be linked below. Go check that out if you want to. We've got these kind of first impression things aren't really most of what we do. We've got a lot of board game playthroughs. Go check them out. Video game playthroughs. The occasional role-playing thing, which we're going to bring back a lot more of. Hey, do you want to see us play this? If you do, leave a comment below, and we'll see what we can do about that. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.